So it has been an interesting day of discussions on policy insights, reform, systems change, and systems research. To continue the flavor of the day, sort of, next we have a panel discussion on assessments reform in India. Please join me in welcoming our panelists, Dr. Priyanka Sharma, Mr. Subir Shukla, and Dr. Jyoti Bawane. Ma'am. And our moderator for the panel discussion is Dr. Parthajeet Das. So I'll start by introducing our moderator who's taking his seat. Dr. Parthajeet Das leads the State FLN Projects team at Central Square Foundation, which provides strategic support to states in their programs to improve foundational learning. Parthajeet holds a PhD and Master's in Management and has more than a decade of rich national and international experience across top management consulting firms, advising governments, multilateral donors, and foundations. Welcome, Dr. Parthajeet. Mr. Subir Shukla here is a former educational quality advisor to MHRD and has developed the quality framework for the implementation of the Right to Education and Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. He is currently the principal coordinator for the IGNUS Group and works on a large-scale systematic change in education through advising state and national governments across Asia. Dr. Jyoti Bawane is an associate professor at the Center for Educational Studies, Indian Institute of Education, Pune. She has over 20 years of experience in teaching and research. She is a Fulbright scholar and Erasmus scholar. She is also the author of Ashram Schools, Teacher Context and Challenges, which she wrote in 2012, and co-editor of Theory and Praxis, Reflections on the Colonization of Knowledge, which she released in 2020. Dr. Priyanka Sharma is Director Research and Assessment at Acer India. At Acer, she is responsible for providing intellectual leadership and expert advice to stakeholders both within and outside Acer, besides leading different educational assessments, monitoring and research programs, and innovations in the South Asia region. In her 20-plus years in the education sector, she has worked as a STEM educator, test developer, psychometrician, and research leader. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Over to you, Dr. Das.
Check. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and pretty divisive, or should I say, pretty interesting topic on assessments with a group of people. I think we had a very interesting panel. I think while they've been formally introduced, I think what we sort of hear of, even as of today, their views on assessment, let me round off with that, and then we'll get into some themes on which we'll invite discussions. I think it's great to have Subir, who is a very old friend, and we've sort of worked and collaborated on many things together. His position assessment is very clear. He showed us today on his slide as well. So it's somebody that, he's on one side of that, so that's great. But Subir, I think, is when it comes to teaching and helping people to teach and train and all of that, I think there are very few people who do that better than Subir. I've seen it projects after projects that we have worked together. But that's the link that we'll start with almost. Subir was pushing me to give me the test items or the items, what is that you're going to, pick our brains on today. So I'm giving it to only now. So the linkage between teaching and assessment is, Subir, if you can start off us on that. We will then follow it, I think great to have Priyanka. She's somebody who can't run away from assessments now. Her entire life has been in assessments across different organizations, some of them including the one that she works right now at ACER, not the ASCR. That's the Australian Council of Education and Research. We'll hear from her, not only her experience, but she is, beyond, just that's just what she does today. But I think as we're discussing, she's worked at Pearson, she's worked with CBSE and a lot of other work. So she understands what it takes to do system assessments or assessments at scale and all of that, and been witness to some of the efforts or really whether reforms or not, that's an interesting point we're saying, attempts at reform or let's say intents of reform, whether it was CCE to all the way to, today what we are talking as holistic progress cards and things like that. So Priyanka will probably be with me on the assessment side of things. So that's Priyanka for you. We have Professor Jyoti, who will actually complement assessments in a way that's really wonderful, because she really has specialization and done studies on the co-scholastic aspects of assessment. That's a very interesting thing, particularly around FLN today. And I think there is opinion on either side, equally strong and equally driven by evidence, that are we focusing just on foundation and some skills, which is language and numeracy? Are we being reductionist? What happened to the holistic learning and all of that? And obviously learning, assessments and pedagogy, all of that go together. So we'll probably benefit from Professor Jyoti's point of view on that. We'll come to it, and her views on how essentially, as opposed to looking them as two separate, she sees them as one. So we'll come to that. I think great panel. Look forward to the conversation. We'll hop from themes to themes as we go along naturally. But Subir, why don't you start? You've written or talked many things about assessment, but there is definitely a link between assessment and teaching, if at all. And what are your views on it, Subir? Opening remarks to you.
So just to sort of clarify, I'm not against assessment. I'm against stupid assessment. There's a difference. Everybody does it very naturally. Say you're cooking something for somebody you love. You will not only look at whether the salt is okay, but whether that person will like it. And that's how teaching has to be too. When I teach, does it connect with my child? Does it reach? Does it enter the heart of the child? And can the child absorb it, use it in life? Am I assessing what really matters? I want my children to, let's say, be kind, collaborative. I can't go around and say that there is no test for kindness, so I will not teach it. That is stupid assessment. I will, since I can measure only language, I will measure only language. That is not educational measurement. So, just to be clear, that we have to know what really matters, and we have to find a way to assess. It can be observation, it may be verified through some other means. Everything is not pen and paper, that we all know. So that's number one. Assessment has, in my view, a supportive function. It is, like pedagogy, teaching, curriculum, all of those are really critical. And like in a car, an odometer tells you how far, how fast. But if the engine is weak, you can't say, I've got a great odometer and I'm odometer-driven car. You're not going to say that, are you? So in the same way, you do not say, I'm an assessment-driven system. You're an objective-driven system in which assessment is playing a very valuable role. Just keep it into that. Three things are important as we assess in the class for any teacher. One, am I successful in getting across to children? Who needs what help going forward? And third, as a whole group, what do I need to do next for the group? This is, to my mind, the true value of assessment. It is not about, saying if my tick mark is there or not, what percentage, all that is, it complicates things. Just lastly, in any curriculum, in any form of teaching, you have in mind a number of objectives. Some you may have written down, some you may have planned, and some you may not never write down, but they are in your mind. A lot of things you can find out simply by observing. If you are an acute observer who knows children, a child is hesitating, what might be the reason? One of my favorite problems in assessment is, especially with young children, when you ask a question and a child doesn't answer, is it because the child doesn't know, or is it because your question is too dull or too boring or too dumb for the child to answer? And how do you know? And that's a big problem in FLN assessment. Yep. When we engage with the NCERT on the design of the FLS, we repeatedly shot down questions which we felt were very boring for children. It should not be there. So assessment ends up serving its own needs instead of the needs of children. And that's why I often believe that it is not the kind of assessment that you want. Ultimately, you assess only yourself.
That's a great point, Subir. I think, and I think, I think great remarks about, and I think it's easy. And we were just, I think before this, some of them were with me in a group. we're looking at at least the large assessments that we do in a country, Priyanka, we assess what's easy for us or what serves my purpose, not necessarily what's happening to the child and his growth, but not essentially the child. What the system is delivering to the child. Correct. Right? And that's the difference. And we need to be sure that if at all we're doing something, we're definitely not, but you look at the language, and that sometimes is a problem. Tracking every child.
Bonus is put there.
NEP and all of that. So, you are not measuring how the child is learning or not. You're still measuring in sense, if you talk about system assessment, your goal is to ensure what have you delivered as a system, and if that is improving or not, everything else remaining constant. I think one of the things I'll prompt Priyanka to start about linking with pedagogy and all of that is, and research has shown this, I was recently listening Land talk about it at RISE and others, Priyanka, where it talks about, and there are many papers and a lot of work around it, what is the curricular goal articulated in NCFs and the likes, and today we have new NCFs coming out, the new NCFs in the town, curricular goals, and I want to say intended pedagogy, the way the policy or the NCFs or the NCRTs of the world talk about it. And then there is a third, which is how it gets transacted at the classroom, considering all the situation and condition of our classrooms in a large system, public system, and the assessment. Often, and the research is very clear on that across many countries, that these are all very different things. Is it what you see also in India? What are your experiences around it, and what kind of problems does it lead to, and why does it even exist in the first place? That you have certain curricular goals, you prioritize certain things, but you teach certain things. At the end of the day, you assess something else. Priyanka.
Yeah. Thank you, Parth, for the question, and that I think we have been discussing, and you have put me in a very difficult position by asking pedagogy-related things, and that is expertise of Subirji. So I will not go much detail there, but of course I will try to see all this process as a story. So what happens that whether it is in India or any other system, that curricular goals, they have some specific purpose, that where as a nation we have reached, and we are trying to define that in terms of outcomes. For this moment, let us forget about the difference between outcome, competency, and all these things. Purpose is not to go there, but those outcomes are supposed to be driver of the entire process. So at one side, we have outcomes. On another side, we have different constraints through regulations, through our, I was listening to Kasyapi about a professional, something about our limitations, that what are limitations, our professional resource, our talent pool. So these things are limitations. These two together, they decide what should be classroom instruction, what should be teaching learning material, and all that. And then assessment is not a one-time exercise. Assessment gives us something to match this entire to those goals, which we have defined in the beginning. So this is a cyclic process. If we have not achieved the goals, let us revisit pedagogy, teaching learning material, content, everything, whether we have to see that whether constraints have remained same or they have changed. So that is the entire cyclic process. This is what is my view of assessment, and this is how everywhere I think those who are into the system, whether policymakers or practitioners, I think it would echo with everyone's view. But when we talk about systemic reforms, I was discussing in the morning that most of the time we have to think from two lenses, that whether we are talking about reforms from policy point of view or practice point of view, because there has been a huge gap in policy and practice. And if as a group or like as think tank or as field practitioners, whatever way we want to identify ourselves, we try to bridge that gap. So that will something drive the change going forward. So I want to quote here one example. I see these large scale assessments as one of very huge reform measure. But what was its purpose and how we are using it? If we look system-wide assessments, their purpose is to inform policy. And there is lots of research paper on effectiveness of large-scale assessment itself. There can be effectiveness of an intervention in the classroom. So same way, large-scale assessments are an intervention at system level. So if we are looking at effectiveness of large-scale assessments, it lies in that how many policy-related changes have happened as a result of information created by these larger scale assessments. And I am trying to do some sort of meta-analysis since past 4 or 5 years. I am not getting many cases where such information has been utilized. So that entire purpose has got lost. And this is the biggest dilemma in educational measurement and assessment, as Subirji said, that different assessments are made for different purpose. We often forget that purpose, and each purpose needs to be validated. One more example, sorry, one more
No,
minute
no,
I will take.
continue, please.
For example, board examinations. Let us consider board examinations. Board examinations are curricular exit examinations. Their purpose is certification, that in 10 years or 12 years, this much of curricular outcomes has been attained by a child or a person. This was original purpose. But in due course of time, it was used for entrance exam, it was used for recruitment purposes, and those purposes were not technically validated whether it is right kind of test for that purpose or not. So if, I think when I'm saying that whether it was larger scale, sorry, NAS type of larger scale assessment was a big reform, now this is the time when we have to think about how we are using those things and whether that is fit for the purpose. Because assessment is all about purpose. If we are Subirji gave a very good example that all assessments can't, they need not to be paper pen. Assessment to improve classroom learning, to enhance child by child basis learning. It doesn't need to be a higher stake like board examinations or larger scale assessment. For this, we need to empower teacher. Teacher is the best judge who is assessing all the time, where is my child and at what step in learning progression my child is there and what is next for him or her. So that is entirely different from the assessment which we are talking about here. So I think, did I answer your question?
Yes, yes, no, thanks, thanks. No, I think, as you said, and I think I'll just want to try to sum up in a sense what we're trying to get here is, and this is interesting, we've heard sometimes, you fix the assessments, the rest of the system will fix itself. Subir, and I think Priyanka was also making the point, usually it should be the other way around. You decide your curricular goals, and then you go to how it should be transacted in the classrooms in terms of the pedagogy and the teaching practices. And then aligned with that is what you measure, to know that if you have reached your goals and curricular goals. Again, you're not assessing anything else as opposed to your curricular goals, and then you iterate, because more often that we'll not get it right. There are challenges of the system of doing this at scale, we will get it wrong, very likely, and then to iterate and find out and get evidence driven about it. But in a sense, it is with the tail is wagging the dog, or the other way around. But but that's where the teaching to test comes, and that's where somewhere, Priyanka, I'll come back. Maybe if you can take another shot at the history of, you talked about board exams and all. Very quickly, if you can talk us through some of the big attempts that we have made to reform the assessment systems of our country, to move towards direction. And we know, because whether we like it or not, I am saying intended or not, but that's been the case, that assessments drive everything. Rote learning, all of us are products of that. Don't look anywhere else, No, sure. Let her maybe give a response, and then
response to me.
Yeah. So the point is,
Very briefly,
what? Yeah.
CCE as an assessment reform did not work.
Yeah.
Right.
I actually wanted to talk, you guys to talk about that.
So, and as I mentioned in the morning, that kind of assessment which does not disturb hierarchy will drive change. Will drive curriculum, etc. But that kind of assessment which challenges hierarchy, increases accountability, in that case, the assessment itself will be driven out. So essentially, it is hierarchy which drives things, it is not assessment.
Priyanka.
Thank you. So here again about CCE, as Subirji has already touched upon that. So I want to touch upon few of the things that one of the reason I have not done lots of research on that, and being researcher, I should not give any conclusive statement that why did it fail. But what I could see from my experience, basically I have seen CCE as a teacher. I was one of the pilot teachers who has implemented CCE in classroom, and when it was implemented as pilot in only 50 schools, and that was in the middle of, at the juncture of grade 9 and 10. So I was at that time a teacher, and class teacher of grade 10 basically. And within a year, I moved to Azim Premji Foundation, where again I was associated in pilot testing of CCE in different government systems, particularly at that time Uttarakhand and Bhopal. And coincidentally, I moved to CBSE as research officer at that time. Then I saw that angle of CCE also as CBSE official. So I can bring in my perspective there, that what I can see, that why did it fail, or so major thing again about purpose. CCE has a different purpose. Its purpose was to ensure holistic growth, to inform, or like we said, that for the first time in practice, something like formative assessment was trialed and tested. Although it is coming from Kothari Commission 1960s, it was not a new thing at that time of, at that point of time, that in 2000, it was almost after 40 years of deliberation that it was introduced. Even that, it didn't succeed because its purpose was to, through different bits and pieces, to ensure holistic growth. And holistic growth, or CC, if different systems have tried that in different parts of the world, they have first empowered their teachers. Empowered in the sense that they have got the true spirit of CCE. But in our system, what happened, that
Top down.
teachers accepted, or how it was put in front of teachers, that was a template and format and report. Formative word was entirely misconstrued. So the formative purpose was lost in terms of recording and reporting of all those formative assessments, which is never formative assessment. And we say that since morning, I think 2, 3, 4 times I've heard that, like he said, that if we are cooking and we have tasted something and something is missing, we add then. So that essence was formative, was lost. And what happened after 4 years, how did we start measuring effectiveness of CCE, that बोर्ड का रिजल्ट कैसा हो रहा है? That was never the intent of CCE कि बोर्ड का रिजल्ट कैसा हो रहा है. I still feel that if we would have measured anyhow, whether it was possible through paper or कैसे भी, यदि हम measure शायद कर पाते कि whether students have grown holistically on that,
Correct.
or classroom practices have changed or not, which was the purpose of CCE, तो शायद हम measure कर पाते कि CCE was effective or not, it has passed or failed. So that's
Sure.
why I said
No.
कि I will not give. Even एक बात मैं और
Sure.
ऐड करूँगी.
I have to come to
Another thing was that कि no detention policy पे बहुत कुछ बातें कही गई. But I think कि those who have worked with CCE, particularly बहुत सारे लोग मैं यहाँ चेहरे देख रही हूँ जो कि शायद मुझसे ज़्यादा जानते हैं CCE के बारे में. They know that no detention policy was linked with CCE, and intent was that if there will be formative assessment, each and every child will achieve, will succeed, so there is no use of no detention policy. And with that intent, it was removed. It was not like it was some punitive action or something like that. So everything was linked together. So that I have seen from 3 different angles. So I think I have been able to successfully answer your question.
Thank you. I think I'll just make a point very quickly and move to the C part of the CCE where Dr. Jyoti will come in. What the comprehensiveness and the holisticness of assessment, really we want to hear you at length, ma'am. But I don't think formative assessment started with CCE or Kothari. It's as old as teaching is. It is a part of the teaching where you're teaching and continuously checking if the students are understanding or not. Good teaching cannot happen without what so-called formative assessment. That's where my take is. But ma'am, really, this is a moot point. And before you, let's say, we'll come to how to do it and how you view it, but really wanted to understand on this whole aspect. And I think CC is a good segue from there. The whole idea was the first C, comprehensively looking at a child, the portfolio and all of these things that I talked about. How are we doing it or how are we not doing it, in India? Your reflections and thoughts and anything on what can you go about it, please, ma'am.
I actually took part in a study where they tried to compare 9 countries, how they were using the word transversal competencies. That's
Repeat again, ma'am.
transversal competencies.
Transversal competence.
That actually is also a UNESCO document, so it's been labeled as transversal competencies. They were trying to study how the policies have addressed towards these competencies. Have they addressed or not? If yes, how is it looked in the classrooms by the teachers level, and how were they assessed? So by and large, they wanted to see how it is assessed. So they asked me to do a study in the India. So when I took up the study, so I wanted to trace back how did it come into the policy. So I just started the post-independence policies. I started with the Mudaliar Commission, where it says how stress examinations are the cause of stress and anxiety, and then of course now all of us know suicides cases. Then we looked into the Radhakrishnan Commission, which says that education has to be linked to the life. So, basically that the current system examination is not fulfilling the purpose of education. It actually nullifies the complete purpose of education. So we need to lay focus on the other aspects of on achievement, that is the other co-scholastic areas. Now, UNESCO generally says co-scholastic matlab interpersonal, intrapersonal, global partnership, global citizenship, then there are these higher order thinking. So these are the kinds of things, and they also include regional values. So when you look down after the Kothari Commission also then says that, okay, there also I noticed that initially it was the terminal examinations, then we said, no, you have to have examinations spread out so that the stress reduces. So that's when the slowly formative also came out. Formative in a very formal form, that's how it is. And then they realized that summative par mat karo jada, and don't make it subjective also. So reduce essay types and come out with more objective types, more lesser stressful exams. So that was a kind of a trend slowing. But then this whole scholastic was generally at a very superficial level in the policies. After the Radhakrishnan Commission, then came is the NP 1986, there when they said you have to focus on co-curricular. That's where again the comprehensive evaluation needs to take place. It brought in the CCE, it brought in MLLs also, and that also you can need. We shifted from a general content-based examination. They decided that you need to assess in terms of competencies. So you can see how we've been changing our trend, and competency actually came more on a very formalized way in the NP 1986. Of course, plan of action also it came out with MLL also, because MLL was completely, in the 1990s, we developed curriculums on MLL, but they focused on, again, content, that's the English language and social science, where skills from competencies, you categorize them as sub-competencies and skills, basically in terms of behaviors. After 1986 came up the NCF 2005, I think NCF 2000 actually took aggressively the assessment, not actually assessment, actually in fact development and assessment of the co-scholastic abilities, and that's when the CC framework was aggressively developed, where, I think the CBSE took up this whole task of developing handbooks, how to integrate co-scholastic abilities among the children, how to assess them. They came out with a huge number of formats. And it was during that phase when CCE was almost in peak. I mean, after that, then the RT mandated CCE. It was in 2015, 14. That is when I did a study. That's when I took up the study, and I visited around 5 schools in the country, basically central and the south. I selected schools which actually took effort to develop the co-scholastic ability. So there was one, the ICC syllabus, then there was the CBSE syllabus, then there was this in Wardha school, the basic education, Gandhi philosophy. I went there, and I also went to the Navodaya Vidyalayas and CBSE school. So I took board, and as well as maybe something which schools which took actually efforts to develop co-scholastic abilities. Since if you have visited Wardha, you know that aggressively this is being practiced, where they really send out children to do agriculture and waste management and so many other things. So that's another model. So basically, if you want to develop, it has to either come ideologically, that is that. Other thing, when I went to IC school, that was an elite school. It was, I think, an international school. Other thing is you need facilities, really, because it had a life skills center where children could go and practice life skills. So that was it. But then when you look into the Navodayas and the CBSE schools, it becomes like a procedural thing, like, pucha hai upar se aaya to karo, and the other thing was like there were huge documents on the assessment of co-scholastic, and then they have, I think once in a month they have to go, they have a cluster center, they have to go submit the documents saying that they have assessed. So it was like, it just very mechanically kind of a thing done. But the journey, what I've seen is like how it moved from summative to formative, from content-based to competency-based. Then there was from subjective, that is from, there has been from essay types, you go into objective, because that's where even techniques of assessment changed also. They said you have to give more for oral testing, ऑब्जर्वेशंस पर ध्यान दो, रोल प्लेस पर ध्यान दो, ग्रुप वर्क्स दे दो, असाइनमेंट्स दे दो, भले I don't know how effectively it was being undertaken, but there were initiatives being taken by them. So, that was the kind of a trend that was being going on. But when we were doing this study, which was this international of 9 countries, we tried to analyze them at a system level, at a school level, and in school level, at the leadership level and the teachers level. At the system level, we realized there are divided views. उनको लगता है कि स्कोकोलास्टिक एरियाज को एक्चुअली एसेस करना है कि नहीं, दैट इज अ क्वेश्चन मार्क. So they are not very sure we really have to assess. शायद हो सकता है कि आप डेवलप करो, assess करना है कि because ultimately if you look in CC, co-scholastic is segregated. It is not integrated with an academic achievement. So it's like करना है तो करो. I'll give an example. जब CC हो रहा था तो I was teaching one of the KV schools in IIT Bombay KV school, and she told me that this was around, I think no, this is another school. उस school में actually they said कि जब CBSE निकाला था scheme की homeworks बंद करो, reduce stress. The KV school stopped homework, but won't you believe the parents came and compelled teachers नहीं homework दो मेरे बच्चों को. There is that pressure. So there is also a different kind of expectation from the community. You give us homework. Second thing, for the co-curricular activities, they were conducting activities after the school hours. Parents says, don't karo, don't do this. Achievement pa hi dhyan do. So this is the kind of, I think, a conflict also maybe. So there is another angle that how does even community look at co-scholastic involvement of their children in co-scholastic activities. I think all of you know that the 11th and 12th, 9th and 10 students generally are not disturbed in the school activities. They kept aloof. I think that I think with the mind, it's been very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this has actually been the trend of, yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you. Great opening remarks and thoughts, I think, ma'am. But I'm prompted to probably push Subir to think, I think I have a larger, even on the coastal as well. Essentially, ma'am, what you're saying is either they are kept as an afterthought, as a second grade citizen to the main numbers and all of that business, which gets you admissions and all of that.
There's one point I want to say this. One of the schools, co-scholastic के जो marks रहते थे, they were using that marks to increase the scholastic marks.
Okay.
So this disappears.
Okay.
So that also was a technique adopted.
Okay. So no, great to share perspectives how it was done. But essentially, you're saying if at all don't at least do that, either we don't do it well or we kept it separately. But I think the idea to look at it as an integrated manner is that point you're saying. But people have works. We've talked about it with all seriousness as well that we are facing a learning crisis, literally. Across all sorts of schools, I would say. And I think in the morning we're talking, we just don't have one type of schools. Even private schools not necessarily are there. There are all sorts of, categories there as well. And children are doing equally bad. And I would even make a point, and there is evidence to suggest, even the best of the schools in country where the children are scoring more than 100, that's I think the trend these days. I don't know how we are assessing them, Priyanka. Children are scoring more than 100 and whatever percentages. Still, when they were tested on international, let's say, where the application was, tested, even they fared equally poorly, right? Where parents are probably spending a good 8 to 10 lakhs per quarter on their children. Even those kids were application questions. Everybody knows what happened when we first time tried PISA. Our ranks and all of that also run into more than 100 and whatever. So I think, but coming back to Subir, the point I wanted to check you with you is in the current scenario, as a country or as a system, where we say the kids are not even getting the basics of reading, writing, and let's say, applying basic mathematics. The conversations that I've usually seen around co-scholastics and let somebody wants to assess SCL, and there are challenges as well on that. But how do you do it? People say, "Arey, wo to bahut baat ki baat hai." That's all good to have. Ideal. Ye basic bacche nahi kar rahe. Where do you stand on that in terms of, is it two sides of the same coin or, this comes first and then this will happen?
It's kind of said that for all the mistakes of adults, it is children who pay the price. And one of the mistakes adults make is that they underestimate children in a big way. And this whole thing is a story of that. So clearly there is a mismatch between the typical middle class adult's perception of what education is for.
Yeah.
and the education system's own perception of what education is for. For the parent, they have made an investment to get the child into a competitive institute or into a career. The country, for the curriculum developer, it is to develop the whole child. So this is the conflict that we have seen. One fallout of this is that we end up doing lower end basic stuff. And to my mind, that affects things in a big way. So, for example, when we teach reading, we focus on if the child can decode, articulate, and read something aloud.
It's about the nested allows point that we discuss usually.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, we tend to feel that is enough. But I would not call that reading until the child can form an opinion on what she has read and give you the reason for that opinion. It's not really doing reading. And in fact, why that is dangerous, that's connected with this, is that a person who can simply read aloud and is influenced by what is read is open to indoctrination,
Yes, absolutely.
advertising,
Yeah.
and so on. So the goal really is to be able to process information in a certain way. Decoding and all is part of it. We are losing sight of the larger goal. So one of the reasons why CCE also failed is because we never did CCT, which is if you don't teach in a comprehensive and a continuous manner, you are not going to be able to assess in that particular way. That really has happened. So I think we keep going back to the whole issue of purposes of education. I think if we see learning in terms of higher order objectives, and that's where assessment does deep damage to things like language learning, because we do not assess things that really matter. And if I come, and I think, I'm sure you're familiar with the discourse that it is difficult to distinguish between what is post-scholastic and what is not. And that it is slowly being, lost. And really, I personally do not believe that there is a distinction. I've been a sportsman, and I think I've learned a lot more about a lot of things from being in sports than I have learned inside the classroom. I'm unable to distinguish between why one should be considered better or more or above or worth assessing than the other. So we do not take that view sufficiently. We have willfully allowed ourselves to be reduced by the tyranny of the competitive exams and reduced everything down. And that is the reason why we are where we are. It began in the MLL. I was part of the committee which was supposed to develop the co-curricular competencies. It was very difficult. It could not be done, then the committee stopped meeting and it was never done. And that is the time in India when things like art, music went out of the curriculum altogether because we could not develop the competencies. It is not that there was some planned conspiracy. It was the grand outcome of sheer incompetence. And then now with this whole, competitive exams, this is where we are.
Yeah.
So that's it. I think we need to go back to asking ourselves, what is our vision of our student? In fact, you stop anybody on the road and ask them, what are the 3 things you want in your child when the child finishes school? They will say things like confidence, ability to work with each other, collaborate. We never do that in the class. Absolutely. Why are we not doing what really matters?
Absolutely. And I think, it's hard to find a child who's confident, creative, expressive, and won't have the basic 3 R's and all of that, right? It will have it. And that's the point you're making. Or there are probably better ways to teach it. If the child is a very hyper energetic, chaplain, etc., but he's expressive, he's creative. And so it's about that higher order skills. And that's what we're saying at some point of time, we're also struggling there. If you're teaching them to certain things which we believe are correct.
It's a misconception to believe that you do the basics, then the higher order will come.
Yeah,
it's not like that.
It's not like
what
that.
matters to the child.
Correct.
Like every child will learn the word aeroplane much more easily than the word was. Because that aeroplane really is interesting and matters,
Yeah, and he's seen and heard about it.
Yeah, and they will learn so many other things a lot more if we did not burden them with unnecessary basics.
No, and that's where the concept of, I think somewhere people are talking about just assessments. In a sense, are your assessment just? And all the complications of even, let's say, multilingual education and assessing children. I mean, while we language, look at the diversity of our country. In Assam, we have 9 official medium of instruction, and I mean, not even getting into the dialects of the tribal languages and all. The multiplicity and the diversity we have is just humongous. And the way we are treating them down is just not just.
Here, I do have one concrete suggestion to make, both on what is called post-scholastic and all of these other things. Sometimes it is not so important to assess children. It's more important to assess what teachers are doing in the class.
Correct.
Is the teacher giving sufficient opportunity for the child to speak or articulate his or her view? is there scope to express in more ways than one? You don't have to assess children to know whether something is happening or not. Let's assess the classroom process. And there are so many established ways of doing that, and which have been tried out on scale in India with thousands of schools. They do work.
Yeah.
Maybe we are focusing on the wrong end in our assessment.
Got it. Got it. Sure, ma'am. Go.
Actually, I have to share an experience of my niece. School, just 1 month of school, and then they had an open house, and the parents were called. It was little social ability, that is social. She was not given a good grade, so my brother got upset. I said, it's just 1 month. New teacher, what does she know about the child? I asked my niece, this is what they say. You know what she said? That teacher doesn't know me. If I don't understand, then only I will ask her. Why will I question her when I understood? She said, there are other two teachers she names, they know me better. So this is what happens, the impact, and the parents' pressure on her. So this is what happens, how we miss this whole assessment thing, and when you segregate things, and it is too early. Hardly school started. I will just zapped with this whole thing. I want to.
No, thanks for sharing that anecdote. I'll just quickly probably come. I'll give you the mic anyway, Priyanka. Because there is a question I want to talk about, and which is the obsession of how we deal with reforms. Even before something is set, we move to the next thing, right? Starting with the MDGs, how well they were done, we jumped into SDGs, something will happen sometime. So even before we've set up these, reforms, so-called reforms, how well they were done, top-down, bottom-up, policy and impact, intent and practice, policy and practice. You talked about it, Priyanka. Now there is this whole, we are forced to go on the bandwagon of competency-based education, board reforms, and CBSE and others at the helm of it. There are all these acronyms thrown at us, Safal, Parak, Sarthak, Q, whatever, QB, whatever, all these things. Nippon itself is an acronym. What will happen? Are we ready for competency-based assessment? That's an assessment that we know. How poorly or how ill-prepared are we? And please share one or two examples of maybe one or two countries who've done about it in the right manner. At least Korea and Australia come to my mind. If anything, you could pick up, Priyanka.
Thank you, Parth. Before, I think I wanted to make a point, what both of them had said. So in morning, I was discussing with Professor Ankur. He was, I think, a speaker just before the tea break. So when we talk about outcome evaluation, so most of the time we assess kids to know. So we were just discussing that why do we always focus on outcome, on any kind of intervention. So first step is always to assess process and implementation. If implementation is not proper, by default, we will not achieve any outcome. So we are focusing on at right point of time on wrong things to assess. So that is the thing, that first we need to evaluate inputs, whatever we are giving, whether that is right or not, then how it is being used. So, and again, 1 minute more, then I will switch to topic. Most of the time, a very beautiful device has been designed by engineer for some different purpose. Let us take a very simple example of a screwdriver. A very sophisticated screwdriver has been designed. What we are doing, that from the back of the screwdriver, we are trying to fix a nail, and then we will say that it's not of good quality. So we are not using it for the purpose. Second, we are not using it in the way for what it was made, and then we start blaming it. So then that was a different thing, I think. But here, when you said that whether we are ready for competency-based assessment, so again, before that, till all of us will not have understanding of, as a country, that what type of competencies we are talking about, as what are curricular goals, what are outcomes, and again, I will double down to Subirji's task, that what are the outcomes which matter most. That's now the discussion everywhere in different parts of the world, that we need to rethink. We have talked a lot about literacy, numeracy, and we are still not to get out from that. We have not achieved it, but we are not moving from there also. We have just stuck there, that we have not achieved literacy, we have not achieved numeracy, we are not moving from there. So I think it's time to rethink that what are the outcomes which matter most. Is there something else which matters more than these two, so let us prioritize that. That is one thing. Until we don't have a common understanding as a system, I think we are not ready. So I am not talking from, I think I am speaking to a very honest group here, so that way I'm not talking against any policy, and so please don't take that way. But I'm talking about the fact that till we will not understand what we are talking about, how can we achieve that? Readiness requires first to understand that. So, and from there, I will go about few of the systems like,
Yeah.
see, Finland, Australia, these many people already know here might be that, but a very small example I want to take that the summit schools are there, a group of charter schools. So how they have used these competency-based assessments basically, that they are using these assessments to personalize learning in classroom, because that is beauty of when we say that outcome driven or competency driven, because you can locate every child on where he or she is in journey. And two studies I would quote here, exact source I am not able to recall because it's too much, we refer that, and we were also involved in that. So we have analyzed 40 to 45 years of data of national assessments of globally of literacy. And we found that from grade 3 to grade 10, in every grade, students are at learning level for every grade. For example, in grade 3 also, certain percent of students are there, those who were at grade 8 level of learning. And at grade 8 also, there are students who are at the learning level of grade 3. But as a system, what we are doing, we are giving them same chunk of curriculum. So the child who was at grade 8 level in grade 3, he or she has wasted 5 years till they have reached to grade 8. And same way, grade 8 child, again, system has failed because child was at grade 3 level in early, and even at grade 8 or 9, they are at the same level. So competency-based learning has that beauty that teachers, if properly understood, it can be used to personalize learning experience for the child, to provide them opportunity for mastering that specific competency so that they can move along their own continuum. All child can move on own pace and achieve mastery. So charter schools, they have used that competency-based assessment very effectively, and 80+% students have achieved grade level mastery. Whatever was defined, I will not say that those were ideal outcomes or what, because that is another area of research. But they were able to achieve grade level competency in shorter period by using these approaches. So
no, that's true, and I think that's the advantage. But I'm saying as a system, it talks about multiple entry exit point, but our grading year system doesn't. As you rightly said, we talk about that at grade 8, children are grade 4, but the other is also true. No, thank you, Priyanka, for that. I'll want to, I probably will take questions right now from the audience for sure. But just a last point, I think I wanted to talk about systems, particularly the Korean one. I think there is a study by ADB, fairly well documented. Australian system is talked about. The only thing I can share from
Finland is similar.
Yeah, I think the Korean one really taught. They've gone back and forth so many times, starting from sensors, then going to sample, and even at the national level, then driving accountability, and that's the important thing. Then driving accountability, differential funding to schools based on assessments, and all of that. So essentially, to sum it up, it is iterations. They have iterated. They've been learning over 20, 30, 40 years. It's not one time they got the national assessment surveys. I think you talked about having it at different levels. We have, even through Nippon and all of that, starting to fund district assessments on, but where is the capacity? I think the national level assessments are very poor that is. So I think all of that needs to happen, top down or bottom. There's a question. I'll pause here. I've been perfectly on time. 15 minutes what was said. So initial three questions, and then we will see another round. 1, 2, 3. Great. Please go on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're audible to us. Yeah.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to go back to two things that were said by Dr. Subir specifically, which was, we don't truly assess things that matter. And even when we do, we dumb down the assessments because of how the system is. And I want to share a specific experience on that. So I'm actually from the Dell Foundation, and I manage the assessments for the foundation, basically as a part of our M&E work. And we have done that ourselves, dumb down the assessments. Why? Or not the assessments really, but the targets that we had for those assessments, because we realized that students were just not meeting those. We set 80% as the target, and we found that students were actually at 10% grade level competency or 15% grade level competency. So I just want to ask
Is
you
there a
that.
specific question? Yeah, I'm looking.
Yeah. So I want to ask, given where we are as a system in terms of like the status quo, how, in some cases you do have to dumb it down. How do you deal with
Is there
like
a way out of
longer
it?
term? How do you deal with longer term growth in student competencies, given that the current system is actually at such a lower level?
Okay, we got that question.
Yeah.
It's an assessment session, so you have to have a question at the end, if at all. Oh, not your point of view or exam, please. Absolutely, ma'am.
Interested in what Shubir had said, that the competency may be at a certain level, but the purpose of literacy, what is the purpose of literacy? How do you, unless you get that to the teachers, and how does that teacher understand that, and therefore what is the assessment? Because the backwash effect of testing will bring the purpose of literacy into the thing, that you understand, you're able to dissect, you're able to criticize, you're able to express an opinion, etc. That was one of the things. And the other had to do with actually a lot of people, and particularly teachers, if you're saying that this ongoing assessment should be done by teachers the way CCE was originally kind of, but there's no model as such. So supposing they're doing it on their own. Now, one of the things we found is what you're purporting to test, what you're supposed to, and what the instrument is doing
correct.
are
That's
two
a
separate
mismatch.
things, the items.
We talked about it,
So
yeah.
that part has not, if the panel could address that, because many times there's a very distinct reading with comprehension. What are the items doing, and how are they behaving in the field, because they're not even trialed, and what is actually the purpose of reading with comprehension.
A wonderful question. Sometimes a mathematics word problem seems like a language problem as opposed to
Exactly,
a mathematics
exactly.
problem. Final question. Yes, Priyanka.
You talked about
Can you use the mic, please?
systems level change. A system level assessment should lead to policy change. Of dialogue around ASR and NAS definitely cannot be compared, but previous NAS, what NCRT was doing and what we are currently doing also cannot be compared. So how do we understand authenticity of the data? And also vis-a-vis, what we saw Karthik present this morning, right? That if we assess the way we are assessing versus if we assess more in a more focused way, the results can be very different, right? And we saw in the second NAS, some states did remarkably well, and we found out that they were teaching to the test and all of that. Now, my question there is, how do we know this is authentic? And two, if we can teach to the test, then what's the value of the test?
Okay.
Right?
Maybe a couple of questions to Subir, so you can go first and then Priyanka.
Yeah,
and
So first I want to just narrate very briefly an incident told to me by Professor A.K. Sharma, who was director of NCERT. There's a model school and he used to teach there, and he tried assessment and he was teaching mathematics. And a child was not really doing very well on sums related to borrowing, like carryover and borrowing. And when he was a very sort of friendly grandfatherly figure, and he sort of in went to the child and nestled the child and then talked, and the child very gently said, "But why do I have to borrow? In moral science we studied borrowing is bad." Then another girl said, "It's okay, I can borrow, but why should I borrow one? Why not two? That make it easier." So the point I'm making is, in the assessment, we will only look at wrong, but we won't know what's going on in the child's mind. So what are you assessing? You are not assessing at all, really speaking. That's just one sort of thing to keep in mind. On this issue of dumbing down, there are so many things to do, but I think a mistake, yeah, I'll call it a mistake, is that we assess only children. We do not assess the performance of teachers, CRCs, BRCs, diets, and SCR. I mean, just to give a simplistic theory here, if you want 5% improvement in children, you are going to need 20% improvement in teachers, 40% at CRC, BRC level, and 60% at diet level. If you can't deliver that 60% improvement at institutional level, you are not going to get 5% down at the student level. This just, I mean, is an extremely simplistic way of saying it. But the thing is that all the onus, why are we talking about assessment only of children? It doesn't make sense to me at all. If nobody else is improving, how on earth is children's learning going to improve?
100% the state level, maybe reforms.
100% or 200%, whatever. So that's number one. Okay. Number two, I think, it's a fact. Class 8 children are at least class 3 level. Repeated studies are showing it. How do we get out of it? And the answer is not only in assessment. The answer is in doing many other things. So if you want to accelerate learning, the most basic principle is that learning is accelerated when it makes sense to the child, when the child really wants to do it, when the child sets the goal, and the child herself wants to know whether she's getting there or not. Can we be transparent about our criteria? For example, in Bihar, when CC model was there, there were two models in India, one CBSE, which was disaster, one NCRT, nascent, not bad, never implemented because the CBSE one was already there. So in that, when that model was being tested, a class 7 teacher asked students to make something. I think she asked them to make the human skeleton also. And then she rated everyone, and two children got A, and rest of them got C and D. But here's the thing. She said, I've given them A because they did this. So all the other children said, if we do that, we'll also get A. She said, of course. So you know what? Children did it. And again, the second round, a lot of them moved out of D and C and came closer. And they went on doing it till every single child got an A. So we have this notion of assessment as something which is terrifying, problematic, etc., but can it become different? So when we involve students in setting their own goals in terms of learning, if class 8 students or class 6, actually after class 2, you can have a clear person-to-person chat with children and discuss the situation and say, this is where we are, we need to improve, what do we do? How can we get out of this? And to do that, I would have to do this. You would have to enter into a partnership, let children set goals. You will find sometimes they proceed much faster than you think. And here, it's important that the state authorities need to let go. That teacher autonomy point, I think that was made in the morning, is the key to breaking out of it. You have to let each school be a unit that sets goals for itself. Assessment without having the goal and commonly agreed goal also does not make sense. You're doing it like, I think one of you said, no, that just the forms were given. What is the use of the forms if the purpose is missing? I think really that is, absolutely clear. And I think Zakia was also pointing to this, that the entire process of assessment too is connected with that particular purpose. And sometimes it may not lend itself to what we see as assessment, but there are other ways in which if you can observe it, you can verify it in some ways, you don't have to necessarily measure it every single time. It's a misconception that only that which is measurable is worth doing. That leaves out some of the most important things.
That's a very administrative method or thinking that what gets measured
it's
gets
an
done.
oversimplification.
That's where it's coming from. sometimes you even want, why do you want that data? I mean, it's a child data. You have nothing to do with the data. If you can't do anything about the child, you don't ask a child-wise data. If you at a state bureaucrat can move things at a district level or ask some things administratively, which is what you can do, then ask that data.
So in fact,
I think
just the last point that I want to make on this is when DICE was being made in India,
I mean, the UDICE, current UDICE plus.
No. DICE, original DICE.
Original DICE, okay.
I'm talking of 1980s, 90s.
Okay.
One of the questions I kept asking bureaucrats again and again was, what are the decisions you want to make for which you need the data?
Yeah.
Tell me a single decision you are going to take where you will utilize the data. They couldn't tell me. They
That
didn't
also
tell me.
answers your question about
For
NAS.
15 years, we could not find any place where DICE data was used to make any decision. And the same question I want to ask also about NAS.
That's a worker's question.
Again, what decision do you want to make? And if you are clear, just to sort of extend this, for example, if you know that students are weak in maths at a particular age group, it could be that you've not allocated enough time for maths. It could be that the language you use in the class is not appropriate, you do not give examples.
Or you don't have simply maths teachers.
You don't have maths teachers, you don't have a textbook, or it doesn't teach on time, or the material is inappropriate, concrete materials are not used, pedagogy is not. I can give 35 reasons why maths learning can be poor.
Correct.
How do I know which reason is responsible? I've been part of this post-NAS planning workshop in several states, and everybody's struggling. We are weak in this, do more training. There cannot be anything more ridiculous than this, It's an incomplete form of assessment to say that student learning level is this. It's merely a symptom. You do not have enough data to know what to do.
Yeah.
We need to go beyond it for us in a sort of larger scale to have any sense out of that data. With that data is not sufficient. And in the same for the class, when a teacher does assessment, he has to know what decision he has to take. And lastly, here the key problem is, this kind of work requires a certain abstraction of thinking, logical thinking, which people are not comfortable with. We are not only uncomfortable data, we are data averse.
Yeah.
We don't want to look at data. And so all of those things have to be considered when we look at assessment.
No, thank you. I think, partly answered the NAS question, etc. I think there is merit in engaging in Zakia's question. No, exactly. I'm saying I want to pick that up. Probably Priyanka can take it. I'll just try to reiterate and probably try to talk a little bit about it. Yes. It's about the items in particular, if I were to sort of talk about, and it's what, at least Zakia, I can tell you from our experiences, it's very hard. Very few people know how to do it well. There is, things about, it takes at least 4 to 5 days to get even to one good item, and train the state people to do it. So it is extremely hard skill.
Be sure you're teaching what you think you're teaching.
Correct. And I think these are all these issues, right? Is it reliable, comparable, all those things that Zakia talked about. So if anything you can share, Priyanka, about that.
So ma'am, I want to support your question. I am totally in sync with what concerned you shared and question. So I have only one example here which I would like to share with you, and that might not answer your question completely, but it will give you a flavor of the issue. So in one of very high stake board examinations in India, we know that for grade 12 children, there are 2 very high stakes exams that's like life and death for students. So it's because I have been associated with even such organizations conducting those assessments, and we do rigorous psychometric analysis. In past I have done to inform people who create that question, because those information never go to public. So one word in a question, work done on gas, by gas. There was a question, and it has invited court cases from more than 300 students. And when I discussed with a group of professors who had created those questions, so there was a group of physics professors and there was a group of chemistry professors, they said they agreed that this is a controversial concept. In physics, it is treated differently. In chemistry, it is treated differently. Then why do we ask such question to a grade 11 or 12 child on which professors are not in consensus? So,
Sure. No, thanks.
So I think that has answered, that might have answered partially your question.
Yeah. I think there is a concept of timed and untimed tasks while we measure an assessment. So it's a timed session. It's about to end. Final word to madam if you want to say something on any of the questions or anything. Or at least you can reflect. Have you been holistic in discussing the things that you wanted to? just time up. No.
Welcome to Zoom. Please press pound, then enter your meeting ID, followed by the pound sign again.
Ma'am.
Yeah, because when we were doing this study, I think there was this very pertinent question also when we were asking countries, what is the purpose of your assessment? And we gave them choice, whether is it for instruction, or is it for grading, or is it for both the purposes. So actually, if you look at the trend, it doesn't seem to be uniform. Some want only for instruction purpose, some say only for grading, and there was a small percentage of both. So I think this whole thing of not being inconsistent is a thing I think which we need to carry forward and go actually. What should be actually the purpose of assessment? Actually, in fact, if you look at the trend in reforms, earlier it used to be for certification, and now we come down for informed learning and also informed teachers. That's something. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you. We hope that we've been formative, informative, and not summative and giving a final verdict. Thank you. Great panel. Thank you so much.
Request the panel to wait back. Dr. Sarin, could you please felicitate the panelists?